"Ride me through the night," she pleaded. "I will," he promised, until sunrise burned the desert sky. The desert wind howled like a lone wolf across the barren stretch of sand and sandstone, and the night sky above glowed with a haunting silver as the moon pulled itself over the jagged ridges of the frontier, where silence was law and every breath tasted of dust and danger. He was called Colt Maddox, a man forged from gunsmoke, heartbreak, and the weight of promises he never meant to keep but always did. A drifter with a chest full of scars and a voice as quiet as the shadows that followed him, wherever his horse took him. And on this night, his boots crushed the crusted ground near Dead Horse Canyon as though the earth itself recognized him and bowed to his presence. He had fled from a town where bounty, hunters whispered his name, with envy and outlaws cursed it with fear, yet he carried no gold, no fame, only the memory of a woman once lost in the flames of a saloon fire and the ring she never got to wear. And as his stallion Judas snorted against the cold air, Colt spotted something that didn't belong to the desert, footprints small and frantic, the kind belonging to someone who had never been taught to hide their fear. And not far from them lay a mauled leather satchel, torn open as though ripped by fate itself, with a few scattered belongings, a pale ribbon, a silver locket, and the faint scent of lavender carried off by the wind. He dismounted, knees bending with the stiff ache of a man who had ridden too many miles, without a reason, and his hand brushed the locket, before he looked up and saw her outlined in the moonlight like a secret the night tried to swallow. She stood barefoot on a dune, her dress tattered and darkened with dust, her bonnet missing and her hair undone in wild waves, her shoulders trembling but her gaze impossibly steady as though fate had warned her he would arrive tonight. And when she finally spoke, her voice was breathless but fierce. "Don't leave me out here. Ride me through the night. Please, before they find me." And though Colt's instinct was to walk away from every plea that echoed too close to his past, something in her tone, soft but carved from desperation, made his heart jolt like a spooked horse. She told him her name was Elara Grace Whitlock, a rancher's daughter stolen by a gang of whiskey runners who had meant to sell her across the border by sunrise. Yet she'd escaped when they argued over coin and ego, leaving only her satchel behind and a wound on her arm that bled through her sleeve, and a thin, dark line. And Colt stared at her with the eyes of a man who trusted neither fate nor strangers. Yet he found himself stepping closer, his voice low and gritty as he asked who hunted her and how much blood he might have to spill to keep her alive until dawn. In the distance, coyotes yipped and the dry brush crackled under something heavier than wind, but Colt didn't flinch as he gripped Judas's reins and offered a roughened hand to help her mount, and she pressed herself against him on the saddle, trembling yet clinging with the certainty of someone who had nothing left but a single chance at survival. As they rode beneath the ink of the night, the stars shimmered like ghost lanterns above the desert, and Elara's breath hitched when she glanced back at the lonely trail she'd run across, gratitude mixing with the terror she couldn't outrun. And Colt, without turning his head, murmured in that calm, unbreakable tone that made even death pause, "I will ride you through the night till the sunrise burns the sky. I promise." The words leaving his mouth before he knew he believed them, but once spoken they became iron, as unshakable as the desert beneath them. The sand shifted, the horses in the distance stirred, and the weight of his vow settled in his chest like a loaded gun he'd chosen to carry for her alone. And though neither of them spoke again for miles, their silence held a storm of questions, danger, and something no outlaw or dawn could break. Elara with his body as another shot rang out, closer this time, echoing off the caverned pass until it sounded like a dozen rifles instead of two. The whiskey runners had followed faster than he'd counted on, their torches flickering against the rock like angry fireflies as they rode in hungry for what they'd lost. And Elara's breath caught not in fear but in defiance, her voice small but shaking with fire as she begged Colt to leave her and save himself so she wouldn't drag him into a grave meant for her alone. But Colt only drew his Colt peacemaker from the holster at his hip with the calm of a man who met death enough times to call it by name. And he growled low, "I made a promise, and I don't ride back on my word." Before dismounting, with the grace of a warrior who'd survived every ambush carved into the chronicles of the West, he shoved her gently behind a jut of stone and told her not to move unless the sky itself fell, then stepped into the open with the night wrapped around him like a cloak, and the desert wind flattening the brim of his hat, and the first of Burke's men barely had time to see those lethal eyes before Colt's bullet found him, the crack of the gun swallowed by the canyon with a roar that turned sand into shrapnel. Horses panicked, torches wavered, men shouted curses that dissolved in the dark, and Elara pressed her hand over her mouth as silhouettes clashed and firelight shattered across the rocks like shards of a dying sun. Burke Callahan emerged at last, his scar stark in the flickering light and his voice slithering through the air as he called Colt by name, promising pain and silver in exchange for the girl. But Colt answered not with words but with the echo of his second shot. And though it didn't kill Burke, it tore the torch from his hand and sent his horse rearing, chaos snapping the hunters. Resolve as quickly as it shattered the quiet of the night.